All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. So we are back, Alhamdulillah, Tafseer Surah Al-A'raf, and let's just go over some of the things that we did last time. We talked about the certain meaning that we can probably unearth just by looking at the meaning and see what we can learn from the name. Can we learn something about the resources? Is this even an Arabic name? We went over that piece of it. And we said generally they are Arab. We also talked about what it means to be Arab. And at least, we said it's basically the person that speaks the Arabic language. We also talked about certain genetic pieces that relate to at least to some of the hadith that we know or some of the information that we know. We talked about that piece of it. And the reason why we talked about some of it is simply because of this word that was there, which said that he was one of the noble ones in ancestry. So we said, is there such a thing as a noble ancestry? So we went in details with that one. And certainly just to summarize, and I would say something that we probably didn't say yesterday, that when we say a certain ancestry is noble or certain group of people may have certain good traits, it is never to be used to condescend to anyone or never to be used to somehow degrade or somehow make someone feel inferior. Now, this is something that we always have to remember because many times when we look at one in history and two, we're speaking about different groups of people, whether we're speaking about the Nazis or even historically, we're speaking about other people that enslaved people. We're speaking about societies that somehow regarded themselves as superior, and superior means that they regarded themselves having the best qualities, the best genealogy, the best in power, the best in everything, and then that gave them that entitlement, or at least they felt entitled to abuse people's resources, just like when we're speaking about the colonialism, and of course, certainly their imperialist and this imperialist. I would say colonization going across different countries around the world was actually based on this type of a Darwinist type of colonization or Darwinist type of ideology, making one race somehow think that they are superior and therefore having the good qualities, and that somehow they were the fittest in the whole idea of the survival of the fittest, and that they were somehow fitter than others, and therefore they are the ones to survive and even have that advantage and the entitlement to take over people's resources and to certainly be the ones in authority. And there's a really good book, that Mahmoud Mamdani, uh that the guy that won in New York, his father his father is the one that's Mahmoud Mamdani, but his father was a professor at Columbia University, and he wrote several books really just on this topic, on the topic of colonialism and the topic of that imperialist type of mindset in how the West considered itself superior and giving itself the right to abuse people's resources, to simply colonize different countries, to enslave people, and the list goes on and on. So he did actually write several books on just this topic because his main specialty is actually in it's sociology and some politics. I forgot exactly what that specialty is, but it's sociology and political studies and political that political mindset and all of that. Pretty smart. I mean, his books are pretty smart, and I would say very what is the word that I could use? Uh, very courageous. That's the word I could use. Very courageous, especially if you put it within the context of the time that they were written in. You barely had people that were courageous enough to expose the Western hegemony, Western imperialism, and the Western mindset. Everybody lived this impression that the West was somehow right now proving to be the most important civilization, the strongest civilization, and the one to be the latest of what man had reached in power or what man had reached in modernity, and certainly set the Western culture, or even Western the Western politics, as if it is the way that we're supposed to even judge our own thoughts, our own heritage, our own culture, our own religion based on the Western standards. And unfortunately, we had a lot of people and a lot of people within the Muslim community as well actually get, I would say, absorbed within this type of culture that wanted to colonize our hearts, colonize our minds, that's the basis that we should, one, judge ourselves based on, and two, we should also race to be similar to the Western culture, or Western, or the liberal culture, or whatever. And then, unfortunately, we had a lot of Muslim students as well in the US, especially in the US, feeling that inferior, lack of confidence feeling. And I must admit, there's one thing that probably exposed the discrepancies, the contradiction, the lies, the biases about a lot of this type of culture that was, at least that was getting into our minds and indoctrinating us. It was Gaza. I don't think there is any incident or any event that happened that exposed the lies about the Western imperialism more than Gaza. I don't recall, I do not know of anything that exposed the lies of this imperialism more than Gaza. It exposed the lies of the different politicians. It exposed, and you want to remember that politicians, many times, although not necessarily the smartest, but politicians usually resemble the power that is at the forefront whenever you speak about, for example, you're speaking about the West, you're speaking about the East, you're speaking about, no matter what it is, politics tends to be, I would say, the symbol, this power that resembles where this ideology is going. Even in the case of Islam, the Prophet ﷺ spoke about Islam and some of the changes, the political changes, how Islam was going to rule over Constantinople, and how Islam was going to one day even get into Rome, or get into the Vatican, etc. And all of that was really to reflect on the power of Islam and how far it's going to extend, and how Islam is going to enter the home of every single type of building of home, whether we're speaking about a home made of bricks, or a home made of clay, or a home made of hair, or whatever type of home. And the Prophet ﷺ was actually speaking about Islam entering every single home. That's basically to resemble culture, that the culture of Islam, or perhaps Islam itself as a religion, is going to enter every single home. And certainly when he would say and speak about Islam taking over Constantinople, or Islam taking over Rome or the Vatican, etc., that also resembles the power of Islam and where it's going to be. The same thing if we're speaking about politics. If we're speaking about politics of whether the imperialist power or whether we're speaking about perhaps the expansion in military and expansion in their forces, etc., that's basically to resemble where and how far their power had become in the face of weakening Islam, or it could also speak about that power that key power that resembles their outrage, their authority in affecting, in controlling the resources, in controlling the powers, in controlling the people's choices as well. Because when you control a certain piece of area, you basically then have the power to control what is taught at schools. You have the power to probably enforce a certain language. And if you enforce a certain language, then you would empty these people from their own heritage. You would empty these people from their own identity, and they become subordinated to the new power. And certainly that basically makes them colonized internally and externally. And that's what happened in many Muslim countries, where they feel subordinated to that heritage or to that culture or to that politics, and the list goes on and on. So, of course, a little off topic, but we needed to somehow, of course, just remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Islam considered that يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم. That's the key thing in Islam, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us in nations, tribes, and certainly male and female. And the best of us, well, the key thing, let me continue the ayah, that لِتَعَارَفُوا, since we were created in different tribes, nations, etc., but that was لِتَعَارَفُوا. لِتَعَارَفُوا doesn't mean, hey, nice to meet you. No, this isn't talking about that. لِتَعَارَفُوا, to exchange knowledge, exchange experience, exchange in dealing and supporting one another as well. So if you were to look at one of the key things that supported the Islamic civilization, was actually during the time of the House of Wisdom, Bayt al-Hikmah in Iraq, during the time of Abu Ja'far al-Mansur in particular, as Abbasid Khalifa. And what he did was encourage and certainly pay for and subsidize all the different research that was done. So they translated from over 150 languages, whether we're speaking about mathematics, books on chemistry, biology, you name the field, and they basically benefited from all those different sciences, whether we're speaking about the Greek, or whether we're speaking about India or China, or whether we're speaking about different countries as well. Those were the key civilizations at the time, which is why I'm mentioning them. They were the key civilizations, and of course the Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire to be more specific. And the Muslims translated their books and their contributions, and that was one key thing that helped the Muslim civilization at the time, let's say, transition from a very primitive society to later one of the most important societies that had its contributions even on modern science. Although sometimes people may exaggerate and say, hey, you see that camera that you're using, that actually goes back to Ibn al-Haytham, etc. Sometimes it's kind of exaggerated to sometimes say, that Ibn al-Haytham was the one that invented your camera. Well, he came up with the basic idea, but to exaggerate and consider that it was the Muslims that invented all of this, I would say it's rather exaggerated a lot of times. Certainly, certain contributions, whether we're speaking about algebra or probably, different fields in chemistry or probably science, like Jabir ibn Hayyan, and just different scholars or different scientists, or probably the way medicine is practiced. Or Bayruni, etc. Different scholars definitely had contributions, but the level of advancement in science that we are in today is definitely way farther than any of those foundations that we're actually talking about. So I wouldn't say to exaggerate and say that it was the Muslims that invented all of this, but I would say we had a great contribution. I'll say it that way. The Muslims had a great contribution, and certainly one of the most important books, I think I showed you that book before. It was for Jonathan Lyons. Sorry for the image that popped up. Let me show that to you. Jonathan Lyons, and it was The House of Wisdom. He actually had a couple books. It wasn't just this book, but this book. A very good book, except in the chapter when he talks about Islam as a religion. He definitely did a horrible job, but in this book, he did an outstanding job in shedding the light and showing the Muslim contributions in this particular House of Wisdom. House of Wisdom is basically the university slash, which is in Baghdad. Well, the reason why I'm saying slash is because the whole area of Baghdad was actually called Bayt al-Hikmah. So we're speaking about a whole city that was turned into a university. Where, whether we're speaking about the people selling or the business people or probably the teachers, the students, it was a whole city that was turned into a university. And certainly later, of course, the Mongols, they basically had drowned all the books to the point that Euphrates actually turned 7 days, 7 days black from the amount of ink that was actually used for writing these books and translating these books as well. So when we look at Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, and certainly the main wisdom behind this is lita'arafu, and this is to let us know the foundation that a Muslim looks through in studying races and studying people's nationalities and studying what we learn about different people, that it is not at all to somehow subjugate different people or even think of one as superior or another as inferior, but it is to use it for the cause and for the cause of learning from one another and benefiting from one another, and making that be the foundation of how we can expand. And certainly when it says inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, that's to let us know that in order to judge other people, it's not really you that judges, it's really Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that judges, which is indallah. That word indallah, in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that certainly the most noble one is the one with the highest religious integrity, which is atqakum. All right, so we also talked about هذه ناقة الله لكم آية. We talked about this naqa and what actually happened with this she-camel and what they did with it. And we also passed this ayah right there, at least in point number 1, when al-Qurtubi said, وَاذْكُرُوا إِذْ جَعَلَكُمْ خُلَفَاءَ مِنْ بَعْدِ عَادٍ وَبَوَّأَكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ تَتَّخِذُونَ مِنْ سُهُولِهَا قُصُورًا وَتَنْحِتُونَ الْجِبَالَ بُيُوتًا. And we said that al-Qurtubi, regarding this ayah, when, of course, let's say, وَاذْكُرُوا, remember, is this remember, recognize, Or is this to let them see the patterns? That is, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given the privilege, or certainly given the opportunity to the people of Qawm Thamud, or at least Qawm Salih, and to the people of Thamud, of course, after the generation or after the curse of the people of Ad, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them the ability to make use of the resources after them. And what kind of abilities are we talking about? Are we talking about potential, or are we talking about different resources? So we talked about suhuliha and basically the valleys, whether we're speaking about the plains, we're talking about the valleys, that they actually managed to make castles, they managed to make mansions, and we had shown you some of those pictures as well. وَتَنْحِتُونَ الْجِبَالَ بُيُوتًا. You would carve from the mountains, carve certainly homes. فَاذْكُرُوا آلاء اللَّهِ وَلَا تَعْثَوْا فِي الْأَرْضِ مُفْسِدِينَ. Let's see right there. This is where we left off at. The point number two. Point number two, is it permissible? Let's see what al-Qurtubi said. Al-Qurtubi said that some scholars had considered that it is permissible to build homes. So we're speaking about, let's say you wanted to build a home, you had the money to build a house that was probably 3 or 5 or 10 stories long, okay, or probably a huge castle. It doesn't have to be in height, but let's just say big in its space. Okay, so here's the thing, that some scholars actually consider that that is the first opinion, that that's permissible to build homes that big. And the second opinion is that it is haram. Wait a minute. Two opinions, that it's haram and that it's halal. Okay, how did each group defend their opinion? So the first group, they defended their opinion and they said, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ مَنْ حَرَّمَ زِينَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي أَخْرَجَ لِعِبَادِهِ وَالطَّيِّبَاتِ مِنَ الرِّزْقِ, which is in Surah Al-Araf right there. We actually went past it. But قُلْ مَنْ حَرَّمَ زِينَةَ اللَّهِ, and say, who forbids the beautification, or in other words, we're speaking about the privilege, we're speaking about the different bounties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you and blessed you with, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given his servants, and وَالطَّيِّبَاتِ مِنَ الرِّزْقِ, and all the different good bounties, whether we're speaking about food, we're speaking about clothing, we're speaking about all the different halal income. Whoever said that having a big halal income was at all haram? Of course, this isn't an interrogative clause, but this is more of an informative clause, letting us know that having, I don't know, an amount of money where you're a billionaire, well, good for you. That's a rizq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's just make dua that it's not a fitna. Why not? You're able to make this kind of money, and you're able to also use it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Well, according to the first opinion, then that's not haram, because anyways, the ayah says you cannot forbid the different bounties, the different halal income onto people. That's the first one. Let's see. In fact, it was mentioned for one of the scholars. His name is Muhammad ibn Sirin. Muhammad ibn Sirin wasn't just a scholar, but he was a very important scholar that was actually famous for a number of different things, whether we're speaking about his fiqh, his hadith, and the knowledge that he was also committed to. And let me just emphasize the word committed to, because you can have certain scholars that did have the ilm, but not always were they committed. Just like Ibn al-Qassab, where, of course, certain scholars actually doubted whether he even prayed. That's kind of weird. But later it was, of course, it was, I would say, and even who was that other scholar? He was a scholar of Usul al-Fiqh. Man, his name is slipping my mind. And hold on, let me see if I can remember Usul al Oh my God, ya Allah. His name slipped my mind. He's a scholar of Usul al-Fiqh, but they had claimed that he wasn't praying. And other scholars, they said no, they confused that because They wanted to see whether he was praying or not, so they put some ink on his leg or on his foot to see whether it gets washed off or not. And when it didn't get washed off, it didn't get washed off. They said, well, that means he didn't make any wudu. Well, that's not an evidence to prove that he doesn't pray. That's not an evidence. He could have maintained his wudu all along, right? And this is very important that sometimes people may be so fast in judging, especially if this person is their opponent. Okay, so when we speak about Muhammad ibn Sirin, people had endorsed his religious commitment. People had endorsed his ilm. And Muhammad ibn Sirin, his own son actually built something like a castle, and he spent a lot of money on it. And it was basically presented to Ibn Muhammad ibn Sirin. And why did your son build such a big monument, or build such a big house, or build such a big mansion? And he said, ما أرى بأسا أن يبني الرجل بناء ينفعه. There's no harm in a person building any monument or any building that would basically be something that is beneficial to them. If it benefits you, there's nothing wrong with it. So let's see right there. It was mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ also said, إذا أنعم الله على عبد أحب أن يرى أثر النعمة عليه. Okay, what does that mean? That if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed a servant with any blessing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves seeing the implication, or at least loves seeing the effect of whatever blessings that this person was blessed with. Okay, let's see. So what are some of those implications? I'm a millionaire. And yes, I can afford to buy, I don't know if I'm just by being a millionaire, if that would basically make me able to afford a Lamborghini. I think that's 400,000. Okay, so yeah, if I were to spend 400,000 on a Lamborghini just on a car, 600,000, what am I spending more on a car than a house? So what am I going to do? Buy a house for 200,000 or 300,000? Well, that's basically a small house compared to, the car that I'm spending on. So I guess this is definitely lack of money management. But what if I were a multi-million dollar person and had the money to buy a Lamborghini, a spacious home, and all of those, I guess, expensive jewelry that I probably would want to, design my home with? Is this permissible at all? Let's see. And part of that blessing is perhaps a beautiful home, or maybe beautiful clothes. And certainly they said, well, what if the person had the money to buy a beautiful concubine girl or a slave girl? Is it permissible? Well, certainly it is. Well, I mean, that was their definition of what you would want to spend your money on, not a Lamborghini, I guess. So I guess it's a completely different culture. Let's see. The other scholars, they basically hated it, just like Al-Hasan al-Basri. So just remember Al-Hasan al-Basri, his nanny, Al-Hasan al-Basri, his nanny was Salama. His mother would go to work in the field, and Al-Hasan al-Basri was yet a baby, a toddler. And Salama, the Prophet's wife, would be the one to take care of him. She was his babysitter. Okay, let's see. He definitely learned a lot from her. In fact, Al-Hasan al-Basri was one of the key tabi'een. Remember, he's not a Sahabi. He's actually a tabi'i. A tabi'i met the Sahaba, but a Sahabi is a person that met the Prophet ﷺ. Okay. What is their evidence? Their evidence is إذا أراد الله بعبد شرا أهلك ماله في الطين واللبن. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted harm to a servant, he would invest and make him invest his money in soil or mud. And the leban, what is a leban? In الطين is mud. Leban is a different kind of mud that is made of a different kind of a cement. Okay, it's a different kind of a cement. So at the end of the day, we're speaking about two ahadith here. Okay, we're going to get to how authentic are these hadith in just a bit. In another hadith that the Prophet ﷺ had said, من بنى فوق ما يكفيه جاء به يوم القيامة يحمله على عنقه. Whoever builds more than what is needed, then on Judgment Day they will carry it on their necks or their shoulders, basically. So let's say, and here al-Qurtubi, based on these two reports or these two opinions, wanted to say his say. He said, and based on that, that is al-Qurtubi saying, based on that, the Prophet ﷺ, he basically, well, adopted this opinion, which is that it is hated. But I want you to pay attention to one thing. Don't look at the word hated, because this word can actually mean haram. Okay, sometimes, especially the Hanbali madhab, they may use the word hated to actually refer to something that is haram. Why would they use the word hated and not haram? Because they were afraid of using the word haram in something that might not necessarily be haram and be included in the ayat when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would scold those that would call and label something as haram when it truly was not. So the Hanbalis, they use the word makruh to sometimes refer to something that is actually haram. So if you ask them, what is the ruling of khamar? They'll say makruh. And you are thinking makruh, so why don't you say haram? No, they mean haram, but they use the word makruh as a way of taqwa to, I guess, not use the word haram and get used to the word haram and be easy on how they use that word. So just keep a note on that one. Let's see. So Qurtubi said, and this is the word that this is the ruling that he embraces, which is that it's makruh. And the evidence he used was وَمَا أَنْفَقَ الْمُؤْمِنُ مِنْ نَفَقَةٍ فَإِنَّ خَلَفَهَا عَلَى اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ ضَامٍ إِلَّا مَا كَانَ فِي بُنْيَانٍ أَوْ مَعْصِيَةٍ. Okay, what does that mean? That any spending that a believer would spend in or spend on, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically compensate them for it. So what does that look like? You spend on your family. I don't know, you're probably spending on their health coverage, probably food, probably maybe the different things that they might need, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would compensate you for that. In other words, don't feel that this money is wasted. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is promising that He'll compensate you and that this money that you spent on your family is going to be something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will compensate you for all the contribution that you had made. Unless, so this illa, unless it was spent on buildings or in something that is haram. Okay, let's see. And let's see the other hadith. The Prophet ﷺ had said, ليس لابن آدم حق في سوى هذه الخصال. بيت يسكنه وثوب يواري عورته وجلف الخبز والماء. That the son of Adam would not have the right to consume unless in these different areas. Number one, in a home that they would live in a garment that would cover their aura, basically their private part or whatever they're supposed to be covering, and the pieces of bread and water. So we're speaking about water resources. But wait a minute. These hadith that we mentioned, we need to go over them before we make a final judgment. Let's look at the first hadith, that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had blessed his servant, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes seeing the effect of the different bounties that he blessed them with, and actually in other words, make use of it. Let's see number one. He said that was narrated in Ahmad and al-Bayhaqi in Shu'ab al-Iman. Okay, and what else did you want to say? Okay, but that's not enough for me. And Tirmidhi said that that was hadithun hasan. That's not enough for me to actually judge whether this hadith is authentic or not. So we needed to go further in studying this hadith. And therefore, let's just look at some of those websites that we can turn to. So I'm basically letting you see this research in order for you to know how to make these resources, just at your fingertips and be able to use it. This is a very good website, and let's see how this website made everything actually easy for us to research this. Let's see. So they gave me this hadith, and let's look at it. And here we go. They said, all right, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed the servant with a blessing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes to see it. Okay, so here we go. They said this hadith is an authentic hadith, and even al-Albani, a modern scholar, he regarded it as hadith as hadith that is authentic as well. Certainly there were certain differences in the way that the hadith was narrated, but at the end of the day, you can see there were other resources that actually had mentioned this hadith in that way. So you have a number of different hadith and perhaps different wordings, but they pretty much give the same exact idea. So we're looking at this hadith is authentic. Okay, now it's not enough to say that this hadith is authentic, because we need to further study how this hadith is even interpreted. So let's see right there. This is a really good archive right there. Let's see, and they made it right there and actually gave me a different narrator. So here we go, and that was the reason why it was mentioned. So let's at least we have an idea about the first hadith. Okay, we're gonna let that pass. Okay, so they said, well, that's the same thing. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed you with something, then you can actually make use of that in a way that you spend it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So is something that benefits me for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how far can I use this for, and how far, in other words, can I expand my resources in usage? But before I answer that question, we need to also see the evidences that the group of scholars that said it was makruh / within the parameter of hated, haram, etc. What does that look like? And the second hadith is, or at least this hadith, that they depended on, that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted evil or inflict harm onto anybody, he'll make them use that wealth in just spending it on building, basically, and wasting it on things that are made of mud, or probably cementing their homes. In other words, he considered that that was wasted money. Okay, but in order to see that whether they stand on authentic resources, we have to make sure that the second hadith well, at least their first hadith, but this hadith is authentic or not. So here we go. They basically did a really good job for us, and they said, well, we did the homework for you, and we went to hadith number 2. Let's see, what is this hadith again? إِذَا أَرَادَ اللَّهُ بِعَبْدٍ شَرًّا. And here we go. He said it was narrated in الطبراني, in المعجم الكبير الأوسط and الصغير. Okay, and let's see, and Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, he narrated in his Tarikh Baghdad, and here's this hadith. And this is very important. That means they were doing their homework when they went for Majma' al-Zawaid. Majma' al-Zawaid is a book that's almost in 9 volumes, 10 volumes. It's it's a black and a green book. And what he did, he would go for all the hadith about Abu Ya'la, al-Tabarani, al-Bazzar, Musnad Ahmad, and he would actually do the job for us. He will do the job for us and do extensive research just on those ahadith to make sure that they were actually having an authentic chain of narration. So once you go for al-Haythami, that actually means, since you know it's in al-Tabarani, that means you were doing a good job and you were doing your research right. And he said, quote, he said, رجاله رجال الصحيح خلا شيخ الطبراني ولم أجد من ضعفه. He said all the men that were narrated basically in the chain of narration of this hadith is basically a chain of narration. All of them were the men, the narrators that are actually in Sahih al-Bukhari and even Sahih Muslim, except one of those narrators who's actually a scholar, a sheikh, a teacher for Tabarani, but he said, I didn't find anybody that regarded him as lacking credibility. In other words, not sahih, in other words, a weak narrator. And that's why he said, and al-Mundhiri had regarded this hadith as basically jawadahu. What is jawadahu? Jawadahu actually means that he regarded it can be classified as something that is credible to use. Not necessarily a sahih per se, but it is a credible hadith. It's a hadith, between the level of Hasan and between the level of Sahih. Let's see. And he also said that this hadith was also mentioned in a book. It's called Al-Kamil fi al-Du'afa. In this book, Al-Kamil fi al-Du'afa is almost in 13 volumes, give or take. And he basically said, well, this hadith, in his narration at least, that there is this guy, Abu Yahya al-Waqar al-Misri, that Ibn Adi, who's actually the author of Al-Kamil fi al-Du'afa, and he said that he used to fabricate a hadith, and he would even make it appear like he had a strong chain of narration. But does that mean that I can easily judge whether this hadith is authentic or not, just like that? Well, we definitely have some evidences that show that it is actually something that we can trust. So let's say what other researchers actually said about this. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go to this hadith and, oops, I actually looked up okay, hold on. I'm looking up a different hadith. Unfortunately, my kids, they took out, let's see, right there. Oh dear. Let's see. That Allah, I'm going to look up this hadith right there. And let's see this one. Here we go. This is a really good resource. Let me show you this book really quick. So this book, it's called Al-Mughni. It's actually a very, very long title for that book. It's called Al-Mughni عن حمل الأسفار في الأسفار بتخريج ما في الإحياء من الأخبار. This is the title of the book. We didn't still get into the book. This is just the title, okay? What does it mean? The meaning of that book is that it's what would be the main resource that would save you from carrying all the books during your journey in all the different referencing and scrutiny for the book. It's called Ihya Ulumuddin for Al-Ghazali, and all the information in it. This is just the title. I'm just translating the title, okay? But in Iraqi, like his name, he was originally from Iraq, but guess where he studied at? Part of his time in studying, he studied in Somalia through the scholar Az-Zaylai. Somali girls, you gotta be proud. Okay, let's see. And he basically said, well, this hadith, here we go, did the job for us. And he said, well, this hadith, it was narrated by Abu Dawood, and he said it was actually isnadun jayyid. Isnadun jayyid actually lets us know that this hadith actually is a credible hadith, and we can't just brush it under the table and just say, well, they don't have any evidence. Let's say right there, go further studying. So how are we going to connect this one with this one, and how do we understand it? Let's say whoever builds more than what is needed On Judgment Day, they will come carrying it on their neck. And sometimes the word يحمله على عنقه, it's not literally the neck, but this is a metaphor to mean carrying it on their shoulder, the back, etc. But the Arab can use the word neck, just like when we say itqu raqaba. This isn't talking about you're taking somebody's neck and you're like, you know what, I'm freeing just his neck. I don't have anything to do with the other limbs. No, that's not what it means. This is a metaphor. It's called badal. And in Arabic, they can use one word, just like when we say we put food at the table. We're not talking about putting food at the table, just getting a table and putting food at it. But this is actually a metaphor or an idiom to tell you that, hey, you've got the food resources. And that's the same thing. If we're talking about carrying something on their necks, that means they're carrying a load, a burden. And that's basically the metaphorical meaning for this. Let's say they would carry it on their necks. Let's see number 3 and what this hadith, whether it is actually authentic or not. And they did the job for us. They said it Tabarani and Ibn Adi fil Kamil. If you're talking about Ibn Adi fil Kamil fil Tarikh, fil Kamil fil Du'afa, automatically I'm going to know that Ibn Adi, he basically made a whole almost 13 volumes just to combine and just to basically keep track of all the weak hadith. Okay? And that's why he called it Al-Kamil fi Du'afa. It's basically like saying this is the combination or the resources or the basically the it's the complete reference for all the weak narrators. Okay, but I still need to go further. Abu Nu'aym في الحلية or الحلية, 2 different ways to read the book. Okay, let's see. And he said, Ibn Abi Hatim, I need to see what he says because he's a key scholar in al-Ilal. And he says, باطل لا أصل له بهذا الإسناد. Once I get Ibn Abi Hatim actually telling me that this hadith is actually baseless. It's baseless. What do you mean it's baseless? Baseless meaning we don't have an authentic chain of narration or any authentic support in reference to actually support this chain of narration. And certainly, let's say right there in Tabarani al-Kabir, etc. And he said, right there, al-Mundhiri actually said, وَفِي سَنَدِهِ انقطاع. That this hadith, that which particular hadith are we talking about? This hadith. Whoever builds anything more than what is necessary and needed for them, they would carry on their shoulders on Judgment Day. And al-Mundhiri, he basically said, well, that this chain of narration for that particular hadith actually has a missing link. And that's why al-Dhahabi also said that this hadith is munkar. When you say munkar, that doesn't mean evil. No. Munkar actually means that this hadith contains certain narrators that we don't actually have, one, connecting links. That's number 1. Number 2, there are some ambiguous narrators that we're really not sure of who these people are. So we're speaking about munkar, or also as well that they contradict other authentic resources, and therefore this hadith at least. So let's at least, help us just remember. So this hadith, okay, we're gonna at least know that this hadith is munkar. We'll just put an X on that one. For this one, hey, at least we're gonna put us just a note right there that this is authentic right there. Let's see, what about this one? وَمَا أَنْفَقَ الْمُؤْمِنُ مِنْ نَفَقَةٍ فَإِنَّ خَلَفَهَا عَلَى اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ ضَامِنٌ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will compensate the person if they were to spend in anything on their family. So basically, what if I wanted to spend basically on my children and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to compensate me for that? Yes. Unless, this is the key thing right there, unless this was actually spent on bunyan. What is it, bunyan? Unless they were spending it on basically just building homes. So it was a bunyan or even a sin. So whether they use that money for gambling, that's it. That money is gone. Or you're using it to build a home with it, well, that money, you just wasted it on that. But in order to say you just wasted it, we need to first see whether this hadith is actually authentic. Let's see right there. Number two, he said, كل معروف صدقة. Okay, wait, number two, right there. And let's see, في سننه الدرقطني في سننه. Okay. Let's see, and he said, كل معروف صدقة وما أنفق الرجل على أهله ونفسه كتب له صدقة وما وقى الرجل به عرضه كتب له به صدقة أخرجه بتمامه أبو يعلى والحاكم في المستدرك. The irony is that they didn't go for al-Haythami. They didn't go for al-Haythami and actually see what al-Haythami said about this, since you got it in Abu Ya'la. I should have actually done the work myself. I don't know if I actually got this ready. So what does this mean anyways? The hadith says that every good spending that you would spend and every spending that a man would spend, whether over his wife and children or himself, is actually considered as a donation. And whatever a man would spend to protect himself, we're speaking about, in other words, home, or we're speaking about to protect his reputation as well, it would be considered as a sadaqah. So that was the beginning of this hadith. But that's not enough, because we need to actually see whether this hadith is actually authentic or not. So let's see. وَمَا أَنْفَقَ الْمُؤْمِنُ مِنْ نَفَقَةٍ. Sorry, I prepared everything, but then unfortunately, one of my kids, they basically erased everything, unfortunately, and now it's gone. But I'm going to get it for us, inshallah. Okay, let's see. I'm going to remember it. وَمَا أَنْفَقَ الْمُؤْمِنُ مِنْ نَفَقَةٍ. We're going to redo the research. Okay, وَمَا أَنْفَقَ الْمُؤْمِنُ مِنْ نَفَقَةٍ. Sorry for the pictures that are popping up, everybody. I'm so sorry about that. من نفقة, and what else? What other word should I use? فإن خلفها على الله عز وجل. I'll just use the same exact wording. Okay. فإن خلفها على الله عز وجل. Okay. Let's see. Right there. This is it. This is the hadith. Oh, good. They actually made it easy for me. Okay. So here we go. كل معروف صدقة. Here we go. And they said, remember that's a durar is-saniya right there. And they said that there's this narrator that is actually not necessarily authentic. Let's see Mustafa al-Adawi and what he necessarily said about it. He basically said that there is a base for this hadith. And the story is actually going back all the way for al-Bukhari. I didn't actually know that, to be honest, myself. And let's see, and he said, and it was narrated by Ibn Humayd as well, with slight variation, and the hadith actually goes back to al-Bukhari. Okay, so how do we understand all of this? Let's say, قوله عليه الصلاة والسلام. So this hadith is also something that we can check. We can actually say it is verified. ليس لابن آدم حق في سوى هذه الخصال. Okay, now we'll go. In other words, the son of Adam does not have the right to use any of these resources. It was hard to understand. Oh, don't worry. I'll make it easy for you, dear. Don't worry. Sister Rebecca, did she go already? No, she didn't. Don't worry. I'll make it easy for you. I know some of it is advanced. Don't worry. I'll make it easy for you, inshallah. Okay. That the son of Adam does not have the right of any usage for any of, let's say, any of the resources that they had, unless it was a home that they would build, or unless it's clothes or garments that they would use to cover themselves with, or unless it was for food and water. But certainly, here's number 3, and we need to see this hadith right there. And he said, hadithun la yasih. This hadith is not authentic. Okay, so now we know this hadith is also not authentic, and which basically says that you don't have the right to use your resources unless it was a home that you would live in, unless it was for clothes, or unless it's for food on the table. Okay, food, whether we're speaking about bread or water. Now, for the sister that is confused about all of this, even if, right, even if you feel that it's a little advanced, that's all right. That's in the beginning, you'll feel it's advanced. Later on, you'll get, it's kind of like how you learned in your early childhood. In the beginning, you're going to feel that, oh my God, what is this? This is sounding like a jargon that I am so confused about. That's in the beginning. The more you listen and you pay attention and you attend, I promise you, you'll be capable of unlocking all of these different terminologies, all of these different words, and you'll be able to understand how the mindset of understanding Islam actually works. So we're speaking about, okay, if you want to say something is haram or halal, you can't just say, okay, I'm saying that it's haram or I'm saying that it's halal. No, we need your resources. So that's what we're basically doing. We have these two opinions. The first opinion basically said that it was permissible to build skyscrapers, I don't know, buy a Lamborghini or probably a diamond ring for $6,000 or whatever money that you had. And that they basically said that, hey, it's permissible. We've got an ayah that proves it. And we also have a hadith that also proves it. So, but just by saying a hadith, that's not enough. We need to scrutinize this hadith to make sure that that particular hadith that you depended on is actually authentic. So then we would go to the sciences of hadith to make sure that we basically have the scholars of hadith doing the work for us because I'm not a muhadditha. So all I can do is really go back to their work. Think of it this way. When you go to a doctor, the doctor is basically going to say, okay, we need to do blood tests, or we need an x-ray, or a biopsy. But the biopsy is sent, or the specimen is sent basically to a pathologist, and the biopsy is going to be basically researched by the pathologist, and or if they did a scan for you, it's a radiologist that's going to look into it, and then they're going to decide this and this. Okay, every single specialty, they'll do their job in scrutinizing that piece of evidence and based on their area of research, they'll give the report. So the doctor will look into the report a pathologist gave, or a report a radiologist gave, or the lab technician gave, and etc. And then they'll basically send it to the doctor. And based on that information, the doctor will say, you have this 1, 2, 3, 4. And then, of course, the doctor will just write the medication. But then the pharmacist will do the job in telling you about the medication, how it's used, and what to expect, etc. So that's the same thing. I'm not a specialized person in hadith, so all I can do is go to these muhaddith, the scholars in hadith, to tell me whether this hadith is authentic or not. Barely any scholars of fiqh are also scholars of hadith, or a scholar of tafsir is also a scholar of hadith, because every single specialty requires so much studying that hey, we're limited in our time, limited in our energy. So that's why I'm not a scholar in hadith, but I will need the reports that muhaddithin will tell me, and certain muhaddithin. So for example, I said al-Haythami, or I said Abu Ya'la. Those are all names of muhaddithin. And there are certain scholars that narrated a hadith and other scholars that scrutinized these chain of narrations, and they did, let's call it a more advanced work and another level of research to see whether this hadith is authentic or not. Okay, so this is not at all degrading the researcher by saying, hey, let's go to the muhaddithin and see what they say, but that's actually being humble to know that, listen, you're not a specialist in every single field. You need to go to other specialists to see what they are giving you, their reports on this hadith and so forth. So when we are looking at these hadith and we're going over the scholars, whether we're speaking about past scholars or we're speaking about modern scholars, that's basically for us to know that their extensive research is going to help us get this report. So I'm laying out that for you. Exactly, if you were to go to the doctor and they're going to tell you, hey, here's your blood test. This is the x-ray, this is the report, and you're probably going to take that, those studies, and you're probably going to do your little research at home, in, your little research at home to see whether there was something that you were supposed to be telling your doctor to help your doctor basically figure out your diagnosis, to help you probably research something, etc. And you're going to be part of this investigation. And that's the same thing. Part of this investigation is that we need to research the hadith. So don't get confused if we're telling you the reports of these muhaddithin, especially if you're really new to all of this. To you, it's going to sound like a jargon. You're going to get lost. But don't worry. I promise, with time, you're going to unlock a lot of these question marks. And hey, I was there at one point when I was doing this study, when I was an undergrad, and all of these names to me, all of these names sounded just question marks floating. Could not understand a single thing. Could not understand anything. I understand where you're coming from. But little by little, it started becoming, it's like, okay, now I get what this word means. Now I know what this actually helps me with, and the list goes on and on. So let's continue right there. So now how do we scrutinize all of this? So number one is that in general, yes, if you were to say من حرم زينة الله التي أخرج لعباده والطيبات من الرزق, certainly that helps us know that we can't rush in saying that if a person had, let's say, a large amount of money and they wanted to spend it on probably something expansive, something, and now what I mean by expansive, not expensive. Expensive is one thing, but expansive, like we're speaking about extravagant. Okay, what might be extravagant to me might not be extravagant to you. Okay, if you're a multi-million-dollar person, to you, spending on, let's say, a mansion is something that you can afford. So according to the first opinion, if it is going to be one benefiting you, and if it is within the limit, let's look at this limit. There are certain limits in Islam. In order for me to judge whether this is wasted money or not, we're basically going to look at this simple rule right there. Let's look at it. It's called DNAIM. What does that mean? D stands for Deen, N stands for Nafs, A stands for Aql, I stands for Ird. Okay, here we go. And M stands for Mel. Okay, you just made it even more ambiguous. I'll clarify it. Deen actually means faith, religion. Nafs actually means health. We're speaking about life. Aql means mind. We're speaking about mental health. We're speaking about, hey, things that lead to education. All of that is part of it. Ird actually means we're speaking about family. We're speaking about chastity. This is ird. M stands for mal, basically wealth, business, etc. All of that is basically that. Now, in order to do that money management, it needs to go in this order. So what does this order look like? The first order, how much money are you spending in securing your faith? Whether you're spending on learning on Islam, or whether you bought a house that's probably in an area that's more expensive, but it's away from the area that is less expensive, because this area that is less expensive has a high drug rate, high crime, high probably danger, etc. Then in that situation, what I was really trying to do, and yes, I bought a home. This is not me personally, but let's say you bought a home in an area for probably $800,000. And you were able to afford that $800,000 home, even though you could have bought something even cheaper, maybe for 300,000 or 200,000 in another area that's probably a low class area. It's a home and that's a home. But the one that is a $200,000 home was actually in an area with high crime rate. And certainly that would actually put my children's dean at risk, because the schooling is going to be in that area. Certainly the children from that community are going to be coming in, and that's going to be harming their dean. So now we're looking at how much money are you allocating to preserve your dean, preserve your children's dean. That is actually supposed to be taking the most sum of how you spend and how much you allocate from your money. Let's see, the second part is your nafs and your health. How much money are you allocating for your health? We're speaking about, hey, it differs from one person to another. This person has diabetes. Well, they need to buy these whatever meter thing that they do, and probably insulin and whatever it is they're spending on there, or probably they might need to buy health insurance to be able to afford the different things that they probably need. Or probably when we're speaking about preserving their life, same thing. If I were to live in an area that probably was a low class, now I'm putting my life at risk. Okay, let's see. The other part is education, something that is basically better for you. If, let's say, you're speaking about better for your mental health, you had a special case of probably children, maybe with a certain disability, and the area that is suiting that support with this disability is basically whether we're speaking about mental disability or probably needing an area to help them probably walk in the park safely or probably go out, etc. We're speaking about education as well. All of that, that's an area that you also want to allocate an amount of money in. So we're going in order. Number three, we're speaking about chastity. Chastity, of course. When you want to rent a home, you want to make sure that the windows are not too open and you're not going to be apparent to the people in the streets. Of course, I have to consider the chastity and the women that are at home. We don't want those women wearing hijabs all day. So we want to make sure that they're protected, that their chastity is protected, and that they're in an area that is also preserving their security. So that's preserving. Now, one thing to note, scholars actually had differences of opinions on whether the priority goes for the preservation of ird or aql. So whether it's this one or this one that comes first. Let's say the other part is the preservation of wealth. What does that mean? You're going to allocate an amount of money that basically is used in investment. You're not going to use all the money that you have. You want to allocate an amount of money to basically let it generate money for you. Investment. How are you using it? And that is extremely important. That's a Muslim mind understanding, one, their priorities in spending, and how they basically do that money management in making sure that they are covering their priorities from, let's call it, from the most important to the less important to the least important and so forth. And this is very important to keep in mind. This is a Muslim mindset. So having that being said, a Muslim mindset, let's say I had everything covered. I'm a multi-million-dollar woman, and I had all these things covered, but I wanted to buy something even more than that. Okay. wanted to buy something, I can afford to buy, I don't know, a mansion. Is that permissible or not? It is permissible according to the first opinion if you were to, one, we're covering basically zakah, okay? And certainly all of these areas as well. So we're talking about zakah, all the different details about zakah. You're covering that piece of it. Good for you. You're covering these priorities. Good for you. Well, good. If you have this basis, then that's permissible. But do I need to donate to other than zakah? No. What's the evidence? The evidence is when this man came to the Prophet ﷺ, and what did he say? He said, "What are my duties in Islam?" And he said, praying 5 times a day. And he said, do I have anything else to pray? And he said, no, unless you want to tatawwa, unless you want to, illa an tatawwa, unless you want to do extra, that's your choice. And he said, what else? And he said, fasting Ramadan. And he said, do I have to do more than fasting Ramadan? He said, no, unless illa an tatawwa, unless you wanted to do something extra. And then he said, do I have to do anything else? He said, yes, you have to pay zakah. And he said, do I have to do anything else? He said, no, unless you want to do something extra. In other words, you want to pay extra, you want to donate, that's up to you. Now, based on that, does that make paying donations farther than zakah, more than zakah, obligatory? The answer is no. It is not obligatory to pay further donations. So the Prophet ﷺ actually said, "Aflaha wallahi," or in another narration, "wa abihi in sadaq," that he would be successful, he would make it to Jannah, that is, if he was committed to the words that he had said, which is whether commit to prayer, zakah, hajj, etc. And certainly when he said that, that gives us that note that those donations, those extra things that you would do, as in other than what is obligatory, that's to actually protect your obligations. Okay, now coming to the question. If I were to do, according to the first opinion, if you were committed to all of this, then giving donations is not obligatory. And therefore, as long as you're committed to all of this, right, you can expand your home, I don't know, a mansion, if you have the money to do so, and probably, I don't know, buy not one Lamborghini, but buy many. I don't know why you would want to buy many, but whatever. Okay, that it's permissible and it wouldn't be haram. According to the second opinion, they actually had a different opinion. Of course, that's their evidence for the first opinion. The second opinion, they basically said no. And here's our evidence. They said, if we're speaking about, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted harm to the person, then their money would, basically the word is ahlaka, wasted on mud and Lebanon. And we said this hadith is authentic, or at least near authentic. Okay, so how do we understand it? They said it's hated, or at least haram. So whether they meant by the word hated or haram, whether it's this and that, in other words, what they also mean by that is that there is an implication on the person's heart. There's an implication on the person's faith. There's an implication on the person's relationship with akhirah. That's another way of putting it. Sometimes we use haram and halal. Certainly, I mean, that's the fiqh way, in a pragmatic way, to say, yeah, do's and don'ts. And we forget to look further with more and a deeper vision. When we say something is haram and halal, we're not just talking about do's and don'ts. We're not just talking about a perimeter of do's and don'ts, but we're actually speaking about another thing, which is, how does this area get me farther away from my Jannah? how does it get me closer to hellfire? How does it affect my connection with my faith? How does it affect the way that I would relate with my prayers, with having khushu'? So when they say makruh, they're looking at those areas. They're not just looking at a perimeter of do's and don'ts, but they're looking at a perimeter that, yes, it will be something that you will find yourself, hey, just spending so much time. I want you to look at the word ahlaka. You're spending so much time, so much effort. You're spending so much focus, and that focus is basically going to be at the expense of your focus on your salah, your focus on your faith, your focus on your commitment and your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without you realizing. So that's what is meant by this. So whether we're speaking about haram or halal, but there's that area that we learn from this hadith that if a person, even if they had that money, and if they're just getting so busy in probably shopping, hours and hours of shopping for clothes, hours and hours of shopping, and you go to these malls and so many people. I'm just wondering, what are these people doing in these malls? And I don't know, how do they get their money too? And here, I thought America had shopping malls that really were big. You should come to Kuala Lumpur and actually see those shopping malls. Those shopping malls, sorry, people living in America, those shopping malls, I don't think they exist in America except in probably New York, maybe certain places in California. I don't know in Minnesota if we have any of those. I know we probably might have in certain areas in Mall of America, at least in Minnesota, in probably Rosedale Mall in certain areas, but not really the same type of, not really the same type of those expensive stores. I had not seen them. I had not seen a lot of these name brands, but probably in New York. Not that I went to them. Okay, can't afford any of these, but all right. But at the end of the day, is that what are we looking at? That this person would be wasting their energy, their potential, they would be wasting themselves. And that's why he said the word atin. It's basically just all that tin, all that mud. So when you say tin, okay, we're speaking about mud, but there's another metaphorical piece of it. In other words, it's just wasted in something that is too earthly. That's another way of putting it. Too earthly. It's not going to bring you in any form of elevation in your deen. It's just going to be spent and wasted just on dunya. That's another way of putting it. If we were to reread this and say that, hey, it's talking about something that rather mundane, too earthly, too worldly, that it's really going to be wasted. You're wasting probably what, 5, 10 years, maybe even more in trying to build this house. And then without you realizing it's wasting a lot of hours, wasting a lot of energy, wasting a lot of time, wasting a lot of this. You're looking at shopping for furniture, shopping, and probably days and lots of time in probably building the place and with the engineers and sitting with the design people and whatever. I don't know. I don't even know what it takes. Okay. But inshallah Rabbil Alameen will make you all multimillionaires. I mean, hey, it's still a barakah. It's still if it was used for the khair, okay, it's definitely, poverty in itself is also something that can waste your energy in teen as well. Just a note. Yeah, even poverty, you'll probably end up in poverty wasting a lot of time trying to just put food on the table. And poverty is not at all praised, by the way. Even poverty is a very dangerous thing. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us how to make dua for rizq, because poverty can put your deen at risk, your health at risk, your children's education, your ird, everything can actually also be put at risk. So we usually think of wealth as being a danger, but poverty can be a bigger danger. Just a note. And I know that most of us know that poverty can be a bigger danger because it can lead us also to giving ourselves reasons to engage in haram because of probably the circumstances that may come at us. So in that situation, how do we combine these two hadith, this hadith at least, and the other hadith? How do we make an opinion when we see at least surface discrepancy or what may appear as a conflicting interpretation in resources? I would say we would have to combine, we're not going to negate any resource, but we're going to create an interpretation. And that's why we basically did consider that piece of it. And we said, as long as the person is covering and allocating the right amount of money in all these different areas in a way that is based on the priorities of Islam, then in that situation, that would not be haram and it would be permissible. Just remember to make sure that it is not taking so much of your focus, not taking so much of your energy and your potentials without you realizing. And then I would say absorbing you entirely without you realizing that in that situation, it would be a form of halak. It would be a form of waste. It would be a form of absorbing and certainly draining. That's the word. That's another word for halak, which is draining. What do you mean by draining? Where draining something basically empties it of all the blessings in it. Draining something basically takes away all the interest, all the benefit that is in it. And it becomes, hey, it's just wasted. You could have made use of that, but you just right there, just put it to waste. So if this person is actually considering these priorities and considering also their the area of relating that money for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that wouldn't be a drain unless you're wasting a lot of time on it. Okay, now let's continue right there. And you know what? Before that, this was just point two. This was just point two. If there are any questions before I go to point three, I'll let you unmute yourselves because don't want to go to point three without giving you the chance to um, actually, ask questions relating to this topic. I know some of you are millionaires and, you know, just wondering whether you should be, buying all these homes and all of that. So go ahead, Balqis, millionaire number one. Go ahead, dear.
Actually, I don't know if I have a question or if it's okay. Let me just ask. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he mentioned that the Arabs would compete in building tall buildings at some point in the future. So I believe when he gave that future prediction, I did
Right.
not hear that he mentioned that that would be haram.
Okay. Right. Let
So
me explain that one. Good that
okay,
you brought it up. When the Prophet ﷺ did talk about on Judgment Day or parts of the signs of Judgment Day, that and he was talking about the people we're speaking about, of course, the Gulf area. There's no question about that. The Gulf area that the الحفاة العراة, he actually called them that they were barefooted and they were naked. In other words, didn't have enough resources to whether protect themselves from the different harms that being able to walk and protect themselves, they're protecting their feet or even protecting their body. And he said that they would يتطاولون في البنيان. But I want you to look at the word يتطاولون. يتطاولون actually certainly was referring to building skyscrapers, Burj Khalifa, all right, and building all these buildings which did not exist before. In fact, these people were barefooted. In fact, the money that was coming to them to give them food and donations, it was actually coming from Somalia. Somalia was paying their zakat to these hungry people in UAE, to these people that couldn't even find food in UAE, in Kuwait, in Qatar. Those people were needing the support from the gold that Somalia had, the rich resources that Somalia had. That's the nearest area that Yemen had. Yemen was sending their zakat to the hungry people in UAE and the Gulf and those Gulf countries. Yes, Yemen al-Balad al-Sa'id. Yemen was actually sending their gold, their excessive wealth, basically to those countries. Somalia, Yemen, India was sending money to that. Anyhow, so when you look at this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ was letting us know that there's going to be a change, whether we're speaking about the wealth and who owns the wealth, but there's another hidden word within that, which is yatatawalun. It's not hidden, but it's actually another hidden meaning. We're speaking about an inference here, that it's telling me that they are yatatawalun. What is yatatawalun? Yatatawal actually means to go beyond the limit. Okay? Although the word was talking about building buildings that are extensive in height, but at the same time, it does also indicate, with the word yatatawalun, it does indicate that they will exceed the limit. And certainly they have exceeded the limit in right now. First, they were the first to sign that Abrahamic Accord, and they were the ones to right now fund the war and the genocide in Sudan, the genocide even in Gaza, the genocide in Yemen, and the killing in Yemen, and the war in Yemen, and the war in different countries, in Libya as well. Who was that? It's basically those that are yatatawalun, that had exceeded the limit. And certainly they're actually trying to go even beyond that in even let's say encouraging the West to take certain stances in order to limit the Muslims from their rights in practicing Islam in the West. So we're looking at a real deliberate war against Islam, a real deliberate war. So when the Prophet ﷺ was telling us that, certainly we're speaking about a time when the Sahaba were, probably wondering, how is it that these people that don't have anything to eat are in any shape or form, or one day be the ones to exceed the limit in power, exceed the limit in perhaps maybe when you look at expansive homes, you're speaking about buildings that also reflects money, that they will have money that is so big that it will be more than what anybody had imagined. That's the type of money. SubhanAllah, bin Zayed, that guy looks like a devil. You see him, you see a devil right there. SubhanAllah, la ilaha illahu. Sorry, right there. Allah al-Azim, he looks like a devil. Don't want to say furthermore. Don't want to make sure my video stays on YouTube. Okay, any other questions, dear? No one? Bilqis, did I answer your question?
Oh, yes, you did. You did.
Okay. Okay. So I guess there's another question in it. So can we use that hadith to further prove that you shouldn't be building homes that are that high? Okay, some scholars did use that, and other scholars, they said, well, this is informing us of something that will happen in the future, but that is not necessarily warning us from building high buildings. So let's just give another example. Let's look at the hadith when the Prophet ﷺ actually spoke about women on Judgment Day. Okay. And he said that there will be women that are kasiyat ariyat. All right. And they're dressed, yet they're naked. Okay. Is this meaning that a woman cannot dress this way, let's say for her husband? Or is this talking about that even these types of clothes, they're haram to use, period? Okay, so to explain it, this hadith is basically speaking about those women that will be towards one of the signs of Judgment Day is that these women, they will dress like the disbelieving women. They will be dressed yet naked because the garment is revealing the shape of their body, or probably even see through to see even what is underneath. And certainly if you ask, are they dressed? Certainly they're dressed, but it is basically the object of it is basically to reveal what's underneath, to expose what is underneath. And certain garments are basically designed in a certain way. And we know that while they're Victoria's Secret and his affiliation with the Epstein people and all of that, let's just call it this way. All right. Now we know that there are certain garments that actually come from the basis of a dirty mind, from the basis of a person that basically is lost in their akhlaq. All right. So when you look at these garments that these women are dressed yet they're naked, okay, certainly there's no question that it's haram to wear, and it contradicts basically hijab. It's haram to wear. But if this woman were to wear it in front of her husband, then that would be permissible, because it would be impermissible to wear in front of the husband, in front of the non-mahram, or even in front of the mahram. Do not dress like that even if in front of your mahram, but it would be permissible in front of the husband. That's a different story. So same thing, if we're speaking about building a skyscraper, for example. Now wanted to build a skyscraper for my multi-million-dollar business, okay? And it would be easier for me to relate, of course, in one building. And yeah, as being a multi-million-dollar businesswoman, I know the importance of having, all of that in one location basically helps that communication between different areas. That's not really me, okay? But just bring you into, that awakening for a second. All right. So in that situation, yes, can I build this multi-million-dollar or this skyscraper for the business? Yes, it would be permissible if I was basically considering all the other regulations in Islam. So it would be permissible. So I hope I answered that question. Okay, now let's move on. We're just going to end after this point. And let's say, فاذكروا آلاء الله أي نعمه، وهذا يدل على أن الكفار منعم عليهم. And okay, it's interesting. So he said the ayah, and remember the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, well, that actually indicates that the disbelievers are also blessed with certain bounties. Are they blessed? Like, how do you understand a blessing? So if you actually use it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's when it would be a blessing. But if you're not using it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's not a blessing, but that's going to be taklif, accountability. So it's either tashrif or it's taklif. Is it a blessing to mean that it's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them for a good reason? No, it's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them, that's a risk from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no doubt about that. But not every rizq that you have is necessarily going to be something that is good for you. In order to know whether it's good for you or not, that's what you would have to decide. Are you going to spend it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Are you going to allocate it for a good cause? Or are you going to allocate it for a wrong cause? The rizq is from Allah. Now, how you dispense this rizq, that's your responsibility. That's that accountability. And it's not necessarily an honor. So not every $1 million is necessarily because this person is so honorable, but it can be a responsibility. And it could also be that accountability on Judgment Day as well, and also in dunya. So, but if a person is probably a millionaire, but then using this money perhaps for sadaqah, or perhaps for spending la ilaha illallah, or probably making da'wah, or probably building orphanages, hospitals, all of that, then in that situation, they had mentioned and made use of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's bounties. So when you say فَاذْكُرُوا آلَاءَ اللَّهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, what does that look like? How do you mention the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Do I go and tell people, hey, you know, I got $1 million home, come and see it, here are pictures of it, put it on Facebook? Is that فَاذْكُرُوا آلَاءَ اللَّهِ? Or is فَاذْكُرُوا آلَاءَ اللَّهِ for you to remember that this was given to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed you with. That this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you, and is basically a blessing from Allah, and not necessarily some intelligence that you managed to keep. So when you look at فَاذْكُرُوا آلَاءَ اللَّهِ, the word فَاذْكُرُوا is not that, oh, I'm posting it on Facebook or I'm telling people about it. But فَاذْكُرُوا, that's for you to remember that it is a bounty from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's for you to remember, for you to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for you to praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for you to allocate it for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's also dhikr. Dhikr can be a word that you can do, and can be an action that you behave in. A word that you do, alhamdulillah, here's a فَاذْكُرُوا آلَاءَ اللَّهِ, alhamdulillah that I have this and that. Another way of dhikr is a dhikr in action. I'm doing my zakah. I'm donating for these poor people. I'm doing such and such for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in probably making maybe more employment opportunities for people, for example. Okay, so that's another way of thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in action. Another way in thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the way, of course, we're speaking about words and also action in application. If you are somebody that was blessed with good things, then you don't have to appear otherwise. Let's look at this hadith. إن الله إذا أنعم على عبد نعمة أحب أن يرى أثر نعمته عليه ويكره البؤس والتباؤس ويبغض السائل الملحف ويحب العفيف المتعفف. So what does that mean? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that a servant would apply, in other words, would make use of all the different bounties and blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them, and hates that a person is doing al-bu's wa taba'us. What is al-bu's? Living in continuous complaint, or being pessimistic constantly. You know, we're going through this, we've got the bills piled up, and our car broke down, and of course the list goes on and on. That's al-bu's. They're continuously complaining about their children, about their husband, or about the people around them, about the people at work, about the people, everything, about their family. That's al-bu's wa taba'us, continuously complaining. And certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates as-sa'il al-mulhif. What is a sa'il al-mulhif? A sa'il al-mulhif, a person that displays poverty in order to incite people to donate for them. So they would display poverty in order to let people think that they can't afford it and therefore make you pity them and, of course, want to induce you to donate, to give them money, support them, etc. That's السائل الملحف. And يحب العفيف المتعفف. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves al-afif. What is al-afif? Despite the fact that they're probably going through a financial struggle, but then these people, afif, they won't even talk about it. And what is al-afif? Al-afif is the person himself actually not displaying their poverty or their struggle. She's probably going through a problem with her husband, but she chose to be quiet about it. And in fact, she went a mile farther and would praise her husband in front of everyone, even though she's probably going through some miscommunication or probably in an argument with her husband. But she would say, Alhamdulillah, my husband is a good man, and etc. And everybody is right now basically thinking that he's such a good person. She's so happy with her marriage and all of that. She's basically trying to stay private. So this is afif, a person that is afif. They're staying private. They're not extending their private spaces and their private spaces to make them public to people. And they're also afif, even though they're going through a struggle, but they're not asking other people to help them in any way, or they're not asking people to somehow get involved or give them in any shape or form probably support. But how do they do that? They're muta'affif. They display it, they make it, they fake it so they can make it. Wait, they fake it so they can make it? Like what? They're really faking to be in a very perfect situation. The situation is really not that way. But they're faking that, yeah, everything's good, alhamdulillah, I got all the food that we need, everything's good, we're covering our bills, everything, when the truth of the matter, when her and her husband sit, they're like, we're actually behind with our medical bills, with our electricity bills, etc. That's afif muta'affif. The truth of the matter, when they sit together and they discuss that, it's like, we're actually behind with all of that. That's afif muta'affif. But when other people are asking them, they're like, yeah, we're actually good. We got everything's under control. Thank you so much. Jazakumullah khairan. That's afif muta'affif. All right. And these are the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised in Surah Al-Baqarah. يحسبهم الجاهل أغنياء من التعفف. That a person that is ignorant about the reality of their situation, they would actually think that they're rich. Why? Because they're displaying a ta'affuf. What is it, ta'affuf? They're displaying, ta'affuf meaning they're displaying that everything is fine. They're displaying an attitude of chastity. I don't know if we could use an attitude. Attitude usually has a bad connotation, but at least a behavior, an impression, maybe that's a better word for it, an impression of that everything is fine and that they're rich. So that's actually this hadith. Let's look at it. So he said, is Zaylai. Somalis, guess what? This guy is actually Somali. This is a Somali muhaddith, a great Somali muhaddith. He actually had very important contributions in hadith. Okay. And these important contributions was one of the most important Hanafi scholars. He was Hanafi. Most Somalis are not Hanafi. Most Somalis are actually Shafi'i and Hanbali. But yes, we had very important Hanafi scholars in Zayla, in Somalia. Okay. And yes, inshallah, the most important book that he wrote is called نصب الراية في تخريج أحاديث الهداية. Let's see if I can, sorry for those images that pop up. Sorry, I'm so sorry, everybody. I'm gonna I don't know what to do really. Maybe I'll ask my son. نصب الراية, let's see right there. في تخريج أحاديث الهداية, right? Let's see. This is the book. It's almost in 6 volumes. It's not too big, but he did an outstanding job. You could see he died 762 Hijriya. That's the book. Okay, it's in 6 volumes. A very, very important book. One of my favorite books, especially if you're doing your graduate studies, like your master's or a PhD. This book is going to be your to-go book whenever you have a hadith and it's related to fiqh. This is going to be like gold, 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 gold. You always need to go to it. Okay, so this is it, inshallah, subhanakallahum. Oh, wait a minute. وَلَا تَعْثَوْا فِي الْأَرْضِ مُفْسِدِينَ. Just this last one, okay? And do not, what is the word ta'thaw? Ta'thaw actually means to be extensive in your corruption. In other words, don't exaggerate the limits in your corruption. Let's see right there. And he said, in a qira'ah for al-a'mash, ti'thaw. So not وَلَا تَعْثَوْ, but وَلَا تِعْثَوْ فِي الْأَرْضِ مُفْسِدِينَ. But it really means the same. Okay, it means the same, but it's a different dialect. And this is it. So, inshallah, oh, tomorrow is Saturday. Okay. So that means tomorrow we don't have tafsir early morning, at least my morning, your night. But we do have tafsir in Arabi. Okay. So that would be what? So how many hours from now? So 8 hours from now. No, it's not 8 hours from now. So that would be in almost what? 28 hours? No. Forget my math. Okay. I will put the announcement then, inshallah. My time, it would be tomorrow, 8 p.m. Right now it's 12 p.m. All right. So this is it, inshallah. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, mashallah. A good outcome today. Mashallah, very good outcome today. And if there are any questions, go ahead, my friends. You can unmute yourselves. No one wants